The Second Punic War was a conflict between the two superpowers of the ancient Mediterranean. It was the World War II of BC Europe. It is one of the most interesting conflicts in all of history. It has daring acts of heroism, blood oaths, and even if you squint at it, giant monsters. Honestly, it's pretty much Lord of the Rings. The Second Punic War was the second of three wars between the Roman Republic and the Carthaginian Empire. The First Punic War, lasting from 264 to 241 BC, began over a dispute over the ownership of the island of Sicily. The war ended in Roman victory and with Carthage losing Sicily and facing a large war debt. This debt left Carthage unable to pay its mercenary armies, which led to the Mercenary War, in which Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca was called in to fight his own army. Meanwhile, Rome took this opportunity to seize the Carthaginian islands of Corsica and Sardinia. Hamilcar was successful in putting down the mercenary revolt, but there was still the issue of the Carthaginian war debt to deal with, so Hamilcar raised an army and began an invasion of Spain and seized many of its silver mines. Hamilcar, before beginning his campaign in Spain, made his young son Hannibal swear an oath to always be an enemy to Rome, and Hannibal would always remember this. After Hamilcar's death, control of Spain passed to Hannibal, who continued his father's legacy, expanding Carthaginian territory ever northward until he reached the city-state of Saguntum, which was a Roman ally. He promptly besieged the city, and it fell to the Carthaginians. When word reached Hannibal of Rome's declaration of war, he made plans to bring the war to Rome rather than fight a losing war in Spain against the Roman army marching there under the Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio. So Hannibal took his main army of 60,000 men and 37 war elephants with him, leaving a smaller army in Spain under his brother Hasdrubal, and began marching towards Italy. This move was completely unexpected, largely because this route would take Hannibal through hundreds of miles of territory populated by hostile Gallic tribes, until he reached the Alps. This would be the most difficult part of the journey. Hannibal's army would have to brave blizzards, cliffs, and hostile Gauls. He lost a third of his army and half of his elephants, but he made it into Italy. The Romans quickly threw together an army to meet these invaders and marched to face the Carthaginians. It is here that we see the genius of Hannibal in action for the first time. Hannibal had hidden a small detachment of men in the tall grass to the south of his camp, so when the battle began they ran out and attacked the Roman rear and forced a Roman retreat. After this defeat, new consuls were elected, and new armies were raised, and the Romans marched out to meet Hannibal. But Hannibal outmaneuvered them, traveling through a swamp and emerging behind the Roman lines. One of the new consuls, Gaius Flaminius, rushed to meet this threat, but his route would take him through a long, narrow pass along the shore of Lake Trasimene, and it was here that Hannibal would spring his trap. As Flaminius's army entered the pass, Hannibal's army, along with the Gauls that had joined him after his previous victory, charged down the hill and massacred the Romans. Thousands of Roman infantry drowned trying to escape the carnage. Following these defeats, the Romans turned to dictatorship. Now, this wasn't what the term means today. In the Roman Republic, a dictator was someone elected by the Senate who was given unlimited power for a 6-month period in order to deal with a threat to Rome's existence. In this case, the Romans elected Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius's strategy was very different from that of the previous Roman generals, whose plan had pretty much been to just charge straight at Hannibal. And instead, Fabius pursued a strategy of shadowing Hannibal's army and attacking his supply lines, and it was heavily successful. But this strategy was hated by the Roman people, who deemed it cowardly. And so once his term as dictator was over, the new consuls immediately threw away this strategy and raised a massive army to go confront Hannibal. This new army would be the largest that the Romans would ever field inside Italy. The battle that followed is one of the most famous in all of history. It would be Hannibal's greatest achievement. The Roman plan going into this was to mass their troops in a tight formation in the middle of their line in order to break through the Carthaginian center. Hannibal, meanwhile, had his troops form a crescent shape, with their weak troops in the center and the strong ones on the flanks. This was so that when the Romans attacked his center, his troops in the center would give ground, while the ones on the flanks stayed in place. This is exactly what happened, and with the Romans continuing to push forward so far in the center that the crescent righted itself and began to form on the other side. At this moment, Hannibal ordered his cavalry to swing around behind the Romans, trapping them within the crescent. This is what would make Cannae so famous, that here Hannibal had done the impossible, the surrounding of a larger army with a smaller one. From here the already tight Roman formation was pressed so tightly that men couldn't even raise their arms to swing their swords. It was a massacre. After Cannae, many of Rome's allies began to defect, and Macedonia joined the war on the side of the Carthaginians. A Carthaginian victory seemed inevitable, but it was here, right after his greatest achievement, that Hannibal made his greatest mistake. He didn't attack Rome. He assessed very likely correctly that his army couldn't take the great walls of Rome. Instead, he sent terms of surrender, expecting them to give up after such a devastating defeat, but the Romans refused. Meanwhile, the Roman army that had been sent to Spain under Publius Cornelius Scipio was having a great deal of success, and had even managed to capture the provincial capital of Spain. This led the Carthaginian commander, Hasdrubal, to abandon Spain and take Hannibal's route through the Alps to join him in Italy. Back in Italy, the Romans had switched back to the Fabian strategy, resulting in a stalemate, but the arrival of Hasdrubal changed things. The Romans would have to deal with this second army before the two of them could link up. So the Roman army snuck past Hannibal and marched 300 miles in 7 days to reach the smaller army under Hasdrubal, which was annihilated at the Battle of Metaurus. After such a large victory, the Roman Senate accepted Scipio's plan to invade North Africa and bring the war to Carthage. When the Carthaginians realized that a Roman army was in North Africa and marching toward Carthage, they recalled Hannibal to defend the capital. The final battle was fought at Zama, where the Carthaginian armies made a last stand in the desert outside Carthage. But through a long and difficult fight, the Romans emerged victorious and Carthage surrendered shortly thereafter. The war ended with Carthage facing massive reparations and Rome becoming the undisputed leader of the Western Mediterranean. This led to a period of Roman expansion, which ended with Rome becoming one of the greatest empires in history, and Latin becoming the base for English, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, and many other languages.